Today we're going to talk about squares and square roots, and we're also going to talk about how to use your graphing calculator to calculate these. Let me remind you about squares just in general. For example, we can look at any power. 2 squared, I can say that equals 4. 3 squared, so here's some squares. 3 times 3 is 9. 10 squared is 100 because that's 10 times 10. All of these values here, 4, 9, 100, are called perfect squares. And that's because they happen to be the square of an integer. 1 squared is 1, 4 squared is 16. So all of these are perfect squares. Let's go ahead and just get that down for a moment. So this is a square of an integer. So if I were to ask you to name a couple of perfect squares, you wouldn't actually say 2 squared or 3 squared or 10 squared. You would say 4 or 9 or 100 or 12 times 12, which is 144, or 20 times 20, which is 400. Okay, these are examples of perfect squares, and that's what you would list. So I just wanted to make sure we go over that. To undo a square, we take a square root. So I can say 2 squared is 4, or I can say the square root of 4 is 2. So a square root of a number is one of its 2 equal factors. And we'll come to this in just a moment. So a square root of a number is one of its 2 equal factors. So I can say if x squared equals y, then x, that looks a little funny, is a square root of y. And we use the radical sign to denote a square root. It looks like this. So on your calculator, this is above the x squared button, so you'd have to hit second, and then the x squared button, which is near the 7, okay, in order to get the square root symbol to appear on your calculator. A radical sign also indicates the positive square root. So you might be saying, well, what do you mean? Well, let's go back to this. A square root of a number is one of its 2 equal factors. If I wanted to square 2, I would get 4. But what other number could I square and also get 4? Well, it turns out negative 2 is that number, because negative 2 times negative 2 gives me a positive 4. So I can say the square roots of 4 are 2 and negative 2. Now that doesn't mean that they are multiplied together. What this means is that I can say, oh, look, 2 times 2 is 4. Negative 2 times negative 2 is also 4. So each one independently, when multiplied by itself, gives you a positive 4. So that's where the square roots come in. And that's true for 9. That's true for 100. I can say negative 3 squared is 9. Or negative 10 in parentheses squared is 100. So the radical sign helps us keep things straight by just indicating the positive square root. So whenever you see something that looks like this, having trouble drawing, there we go, got a heart in there. Okay, so for example, if I said the square root of 4, the only answer is 2 because I'm indicating the positive root. Same thing if I took the square root of 100. The positive root of 100 is 10. You might ask, well then how do we indicate a negative root? Well, we indicate a negative root by using a negative sign. Okay. So we place that negative sign outside of the radical sign. So if I wanted to know the negative square root of 4, I would calculate the square root of 4, giving me 2, and then place the negative sign out front. Following the order of operations, we would do whatever's underneath the radical sign first. So this is similar to -1 times the square root of 4. We calculate this first, we multiply it by -1, and get the -2. So I could say the negative square root of 25, and you would say what? What does that equal? -5. Okay. Sometimes I might want both the positive and the negative. We use a special symbol that looks like this, plus negative. That doesn't mean that one number is both positive and negative at the same time. It just means that I want both answers. I want the positive answer and I want the negative answer. So if I wanted to know the positive and negative root of 9, I could say that it is equal to the positive 3 and the -3. You could write your solution like this, or if you wanted to understand its meaning a little bit more, you could say, okay, well, positive 3 and -3. Again, it doesn't mean that I would take 3 times -3 because that doesn't give me a positive 9. It means I could do 3 times 3 to get 9, or I can do -3 times -3 to get 9. So we have this plus minus sign. We don't type this into our calculator, so you just have to recognize that if you have a plus minus sign out front, you can calculate the square root of 9 and then put the plus minus sign in front of that. Okay. When you type this into your calculator, the negative sign, so for example, if you wanted to find the negative square root of, let's try 6 to the nearest 10th. Let's see how to type this in. To the nearest 10th, why did I say that? Well, because there aren't two integers that multiply together to give you 6. Two of the same integer, I should say. I know 2 times 3 is 6, but 2 and 3 are not the same. So I'm going to get some kind of decimal. And when I type this in, you will hit the negative sign first, because we do have a negative sign. Then you'll hit second x squared, because that gets you the square root. And then you can type in 6 and hit enter. When you do that, you should get -2.449489743. Okay. We are going to round to the nearest 10th, so we will say that the negative square root of 6 is about equal to -2.4. You might be asked to find the square root of a negative number. I'd like you to try to type this into your calculator. Now this is different from having the negative sign out front. So type this into your calculator, second x squared negative sign 100, and then hit enter. What happens? You get an error. It says non-real answer. Okay. And let's think about that. So this doesn't exist. There's no solution here. Why is there no solution? How come you can't find the square root of a negative number? Well, if you think about it, in our mathematical system, we can't ever take a positive and negative and multiply it together to get like a perfect square, because the positive and the negative are not the same number. So how do you get to -100? Well, you'd have to do 10 times -10, right? Okay, and these are not the same. They're close, but they are not the same. They are in fact opposites of each other, and the negative sign makes a difference. So 10 times 10 will give us a positive 100. -10 times -10 gives us a positive 100. There is no number that is the same that when multiplied by itself will give us a negative. Okay, so these don't exist. You cannot take the square root of a negative number. So just looking at some examples, you'll be asked to calculate, and of course you may use a calculator. We'll talk about estimating in just a moment. And you might need to round to the nearest tenth. Please go ahead and calculate the following. So hit pause and calculate, and hit unpause when you're ready to see the solutions. Okay, so we just did this one, the negative square root of 6. Remember, your negative's out front, so that's okay. So negative 2.4. Plus or minus the square root of 15. So I want both the positive root and the negative root. So when I type this into my calculator, I'm not going to type in the plus negative. I'm just going to type in the square root of 15. I'll write the plus negative here, and I will get plus negative 3.9. Be careful with your rounding. You could also just write 3.9 comma negative 3.9. Here, when you try to type this into your calculator, you hit negative second x squared negative 4. Again, you get a non-real answer because a negative with the negative here does not make a positive. Okay, so right here, this does not exist, so there is no solution. Okay, so double negative does not make a positive. And again, it's because of the order of operations. Here, square root of 20, we're going to get 4.5. It's just going to be positive because remember the radical sign indicates just the positive root. And let me just ask you another question here. What are the two roots of 225? Hit pause if you need to. When you find the two roots of 25, you are looking for the positive root and the negative root. When you type this into your calculator, you're going to find that 15 plus or minus 15 are the positive and the negative roots of 225. Let's talk about estimation, because again, unless it's a perfect square, your answer is going to be a decimal of some sort. Estimation is all about making things easy and about using our knowledge. So let's estimate the square root of 33 to the nearest integer, nearest whole number. Okay, here in this case it's a whole number because we're dealing with a positive. So I want to think about my perfect squares. This is how you're going to estimate. And you might even want to make a little list that you can use in your notes. So go ahead and make a list of perfect squares. You can start with 1 squared, 2 squared, 3 squared, 4 squared. So go ahead and do that now. So here are mine. I just went up to 15, 1 squared, 2 squared, 3 squared, 4 squared. And why does this help me? Well, when I'm estimating, I want to figure out what 33 happens to be between. What number is it closest to? Well, I can see here 33 is in between 25 and 36. It's closer to 36. So I'm going to say that this is pretty close to the square root of 36, and I know that the square root of 36 is 6, and that's my estimated answer. Let's take a look at another one. Let's say we had the negative square root of 129. And again, it looks a little bit tricky, but when you start thinking about your perfect squares, you should be able to do these in your head. 10 times 10, 11 times 11, 12 times 12, 13 times 13, 14 times 14, 15 times 15. That's about as high as I would probably go. But 129. Well, what is 129 in between? It's in between 121 and 144. It's obviously closer to 121. So I'm going to say that this is closer to the negative square root of 121. I know that the square root of 121 is 11, and I just have to plop that negative sign out front because, again, we're looking for that negative root. So I will say negative 11. So again, you just want to keep things simple. We can make up anything. I can say the square root of 60. Okay, again, what is 60 closest to here? It's closest to 64, so I'm just going to change it, make it more compatible. The square root of 64, I know, well, it is 8. So that's the idea. I think that's all we're going to go through now. We will practice this more in class tomorrow, so I'll see you then. Thank you. Bye.